Well, welcome back for your very last class. It feels like it's gone by really fast. I mean, we've met 4 times, but it feels like it's been a long time. So what I wanted to start off, as I do with every class, whether you guys have any questions from either the tour we did on Friday or from the class before, and then we're going to launch into a little bit of hands-on. So I'm going to show, this is the soil map survey I talked about on the very first class. And just to show you kind of what it looks like and how I take information from it, because it does have a lot of information on it. It's somewhat overwhelming to look at, but I can just show you some basics that you can pull from it. And some of it might be intuitive, but some of it might not be. So before we get into that, do we have any questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
so I live in a swamp.
Welcome to the swamp.
It's just so wet. How do I amend the soil? I mean, I
Right.
see all these wonderful things that people have done
Right.
and
Well, what some people do is look at larger scale projects where they actually do regrading, or maybe they try, and trying to avoid that. Generally, the rule is that to improve all soil types, compost. Compost is a universal soil improver. Even you can mix sand into your soil, but I don't think that's any better than just straight compost. It doesn't offer much, and you have to add a large quantity. And even then, that water still drains somewhere. You have to do something with the hydrology of where that water is going. But generally, I say compost is a universal soil amendment. So what it does for sandy soils is it helps with moisture retention, which is a problem with sandy soils. And then with clay, it improves soil drainage because it adds more porosity, more space in between those soil particles for the water to infiltrate through. Because clay is a very, very, very tiny particle, and they stick very closely together. So generally, I say compost, but if it's like standing water, you might have to look at either regrading or maybe even a rain garden if it's that wet and if it's something that's cooling that much water.
But with compost, you have to dig it in, right, and mix it in with the soil?
Not necessarily, and in fact, there's a lot of soil scientists who would argue that harms the integrity of the soil biology. All those microorganisms get disturbed if you do a lot of tilling. But yeah, if you're doing something where you're digging anyways, you can put compost in there, and certainly that helps. But even just layering it on top and slowly building an organic layer for water to kind of soak into, it's helpful. Some people use wood chips in large quantities. Those do biodegrade over time, but you can't plant in them right away because they're usually bird plants. They have too much, they deplete nitrogen from the soil because they decompose. So until they are composted, you can't really plant it.
can you add any nitrogen on top of them to utilize?
You can kind of neutralize it a little bit. And a lot of woody plants are fine with going into wood chips, but the perennials, I would say avoid perennials. Unless you have like a layer of compost and maybe you have nitrogen amendments in there, but then you're adding a lot of different things and you're really messing with the biology of the soil. Yeah, that's a tough one. We had to, and we've been slowly putting layers of wood chips in certain areas to try and kind of build it up, but they do decompose over time, and it's a soil factor too. It's that there's a layer of clay that's probably under that soil that just retains a lot of moisture.
So when you're choosing wood chips to put down, what's the rule of thumb? Do you want softwood like pine or hardwood?
I use whatever is available, but softwoods probably decompose much more quickly because the cellulose in those isn't as tough as the hardwoods. But universally, I say it doesn't matter, softwood, hardwood, universally try and get something that doesn't have any disease associated with it. So if a tree was taken down for like a big vascular disease or something, you don't want those wood chips back into the soil. And if it had like a foliar disease, like a leaf spot or something, that doesn't matter so much because you're just using the wood and it's not transferable on the wood. But yeah, a lot of wood or bark funguses, you wouldn't want that.
Can I throw something in there?
Yeah.
We had the same problem at our house where every time it rained, there was a certain area that was filling up. we tried a lot of different things. We finally, just my husband and I got shovels and we dug a little pond. Right at the main point of it, we got a pond liner, put it in, and then we did dry stream beds. We watched which way the water flowed, and we did dry stream beds going out there, and we just planted all around everything, and that was 4 years ago, and it looks fabulous.
Well, so,
We gave a place for the water to go. And it stayed, I mean, we have to add water.
are you signed up for?
No.
Okay, well, you can talk to me, and I think maybe even a rain garden might be a good consideration for this location, especially if it's pooling that much water, because rain gardens are a little bit different from a planted garden in that you excavate it a little bit, and it usually goes about 24 to 36 inches down, and then you're re-adding a layer of like gravel and amended soil with compost into that. You know, you're backfilling with that. You're not necessarily backfilling with just the native soil, and so the drainage tends to be better, but it's also meant to be a drainage point. So
That's almost like what we did with,
Right.
with our, the mini.
with the bottom of your
Yeah.
slope, right?
Yeah, that's, ours is on a slope, so that's.
Like you use the French.
It was basically, the concept was a French drain because we dug it down,
Right.
there's no drain, but it would, then it's gravel, rock.
Yeah, that's what I mean by a dry stream bed. That's what it is.
And I can send some resources about it.
Direct
Free
water.
Would you? Yeah, absolutely. Just send me an email, so
Yeah, okay.
I forget it. Right. So any other, yeah,
We sort of touched on it a little bit, wondering whether we should put mulch down or compost. You know, what's your feeling about that?
it really depends on the purpose. So is it for keeping weeds down?
Well, it's to retard the weeds, yes, but also to amend the soil a little bit also.
There's a lot to be said about the lasagna method too.
Or right, you could alternate, or you could do like a
Wait,
very
wait.
fine layer of compost and then do a layer of mulch.
Uh-huh.
And those on top of one another, because the mulch does decompose. Eventually it
Yes, it
becomes
does, yeah.
compost. But because it's lignin, it's the cellulose and lignin, it's the really tough fibers from trees, it just doesn't decompose very quickly. So those nutrients aren't very available. Compost is richer in that point of view. It's usually made up of other things.
Right, yes.
So it's a little bit better for soil health.
So the lasagna method.
The and they do decompose, and same thing with leaves. If you have leaves at the end of the year, pile that in too, and then in the spring you can put your mulch on top of that. I mulch with leaves, and you think like, oh my God, that's a lot of leaves. They're never going to go anywhere. No, they decompose. They go very quickly. That's what those organisms in the soil are doing. They're breaking them down.
Okay. It's too bad you can't buy bags of mushroom compost.
You can.
Can
I mushrooms.
Your Roxas
Ramesses has
Bags
bags
of-
of mushroom
yes.
compost? Who does?
Roxas, that's why I put it down last year,
I
but
know
then
they have
man,
leaf.
everything took
Oh,
off.
I know they have leaf grow. I didn't know they.
Yeah, they're mushroom compost.
Covered. you know,
It's a little more expensive to do it that way, but it's easier to handle.
Yeah.
Right, especially if you don't need, a whole.
Yeah, if you don't want. You'd be amazed how quickly a yard or two.
I was gonna say.
It does, it goes very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd probably want to.
That's quick, real quick.
I do have one thing to say about the leaf
Yeah.
process. So I did that last year on my raised beds.
Right.
This year I've been inundated with, we called them roly-poly bugs or pill bugs.
Oh, yeah, bugs.
Because they like the moist, wet environment. So now they've eaten everything that I plant
Okay.
in my raised bed, so I just bought some nice research.
Oh, gosh. So with a word of caution, right?
With a word, where you wanna put it. Don't put
You're
it
talking about the
somewhere,
leaf mulch idea?
just leaves.
Yes,
Yeah, chop up leaves.
They particularly like vegetables. They leave most
Yes.
other plants alone.
Yes,
Yeah,
I did that in my raised bed.
Right, yeah, it doesn't help.
And technically, they say not to cut up the leaves because that,
I didn't, I
Yes.
did them whole,
yeah.
but yeah, I think because we had such a wet spring too.
Right, and you know, the exception to that rule also is if there's a foliar fungus or a leaf spot on those leaves, you don't wanna use those, cause it could re-inoculate the trees around it.
How long does it take for the 1,000 oak leaves that we get? If somebody's gonna have this been ongoing argument, right? We would take part of the yard and just keep putting the leaves back on that
Right.
section. how long would it take for them to decompose?
That's a good question.
A winter
Yeah.
or 2 years?
Oh, I would say 6 to 8 months.
6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
And you can always toss some soil or compost over the top of them. That
You
Speed it up.
You can chop them up, and you might want to do that after the winter, after like the overwintering things have gone through. You can chop them up, and it goes a lot more quickly. And it really depends on the oak leaves too, because some are really thick and leathery, and some break down a lot more quickly than others.
So the problem we have is the wind comes down the river, and all of the leaves where he's willing to try this experiment will now end up where we don't want to try the experiment.
Oh, no.
So is that where you get that sugar cane netting and
You
put
could
it
do
down?
that, or like some kind of barrier, even just a little fence or something, like the metal fencing you had at your, just enough to keep it from going any place, especially if you're trying to keep it from blowing to the other place.
Because we have that wind problem through the meadow, so I put little fences up to keep the grasses from mowing,
Right.
they get up high enough that they'll start leaning, making it so other things can't grow.
Yeah, catchments.
Yeah.
I sympathize with that though, because the
Yeah.
same thing happens to us. All the leaves get piled into a spot, I don't want them to be, so I
Yes,
spend a lot of time moving them while the just push.
well, it pushes it right back in, so this is kind of been, so chopping might be the only way.
I think chopping's a good way, especially now that we're out of winter. That's generally why we leave them whole, is because there are, cocoons in there and things like that. Well, at this time of year, they're probably not in there.
Do you have a mulching mower?
Are you trying to get us divorced? Yes, actually, we have a mulch, but he is not attached to the mower. It's a long story, Lynn. It takes up a conversation.
I'm not gonna get into that.
Yes, moving on.
Imagine in a conversation in a lawyer's office, it's all
I'll
about.
write down the stories and arguments we had with the other people in our houses. It'd be a really funny one. So anyways, this is the soil map survey I talked about the very first day of class, and there's one that's a little bit clunkier. This is the UC Davis one that I actually kind of prefer. It's got better graphics, a little easier, more user-friendly. Was it you that tried the other one? And it had
Yeah.
Okay, yep. So this one's a lot easier. All you do is you punch in your address, and what we did is we just punched in the address for the YMCA. And then just using the cursor, you see there's little crosshairs, you can click on your location, and it tells you what those soils are primarily made up of in this particular organic region. Now, keep in mind, this is all a little bit subject to a lot of construction that's happened. Obviously there's not gonna be a hard line, this soil is gonna be exactly this, and then on the other side of that line, it's gonna be exactly that.
So is
There's room for error.
is that composition, everything that's on that map? Or is it where you?
No, it's just where you've clicked, so it'll change. Let's click back on the
Does it have a word?
HFP.
Does it have a term for asphalt?
There is like what do they call it, an urban deposit or something, where it's basically just like, it's like chunks of cement and stuff. But for the most part, this is what the parent material would have been in these particular spots. And it gives you the percentage of what these areas are made up of. So this one is almost 41% Hambrook, 39% sassafras. That's predominantly what it is. There's a few minor soil types. And why don't you click on Hambrook?
What is Hambrook?
Well, we're about to show you. So this is kind of the soil horizon of what the colors would look like even. But if we go to description, do you see description in the top right?
Yes.
Okay. It gives you all the information about Hambrook series, and they're all named different things. The names doesn't really
Does it
matter.
say somewhere that it's like clay versus?
Yeah, it says parent material stratified alluvial and marine sediments. And so it's taxonomic class, it's a fine, loamy, siliceous soil, so that just means there's a fine sedimentary soil, so it's a very smooth, fine, loamy. And that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking for words like that. Hambrook loam, it's usually it gives you the percent of the slope, which around here probably isn't much more than 5% unless you have a steep embankment. And then these different letters, and you don't have to necessarily know what they mean. It's just in reference to, those layers we looked at in that graphic. So it's just,
Colors.
it's just showing, yeah, those colors. So it tells you about the color a little bit, but it may have qualities in here that is good to know. I'm trying to think. There's one of them around here that says it's a very acidic soil. It's very depleted. So it's low fertility, but highly acidic. And that information is good to know because it may tell you, okay, well, this area I might have to do a lot of amending with lime. It may need a lot of organic matter. If you scroll back up,
I wanna tell you guys, it's on the resource page and handout, so
okay.
you don't have to write that down. I'm sorry, what did you want me to do, Kayla?
If you want to scroll back up to the top.
Okay.
Usually what it will tell you is that, another one I look at is drainage class. And that tells you what its ability to drain water looks like. And this one says well drained, which I'm jealous because a lot of the soils around here are not very well drained. And they'll give them different letters to classify that drainage ability. Usually C or D soils are poorly drained and A and B are better drained. So my guess is that these were probably all fields, agricultural fields at one point in time, probably high quality ones, given the drainage class of these, which have been now, renovated into homes and buildings like this and things like that. So
So if they're well drained, does that make it harder for them to hold the lime, for example, and the nutrients?
not necessarily, because it's also a loamy soil, so that says to me the texture has a good capacity for holding on to moisture. If it were sandy, yes, I would be a little bit worried about its ability. And in that circumstance, this is more of like a soils talk, but we'll go ahead and down this road. You would add more lime to sandier soils than you would for clay or loamy soils because its capacity to hold water is much less. It's a very low nutrient soils, sandy soils. So, and that's why it's important to kind of look at these keywords and kind of try and extrapolate information from this, because this is a lot of information.
So are you saying that clay holds nutrients better?
Very well. Clay soils are high nutrient, and that's just because of their, they have particles that have an electric charge, and that charge holds on to nutrients that have the opposite charge. So, lots of high calcium, high magnesium, usually, sometimes high phosphorus as well. But nitrogen is the exception to all of this rule because nitrogen is very volatile. It changes quickly. And it changes a lot with moisture, and because we get so much rain here in Maryland, that changes very frequently. So nitrogen is the exception to the rule. Don't listen to that.
So when your soil is alkaline,
Yes.
like I know my hydrangeas have turned red. So that means it's very alkaline, is that correct?
I think so. I get them mixed up a lot.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Okay.
So
thank
it
you.
is, it's like shockingly. So what does that mean in terms of the soil content here, alkaline?
It might not mean very much. It might mean that you have an alluvial soil with a lot of deposits that would have had high calcium in it, such as shell. And that's not totally uncommon, especially in the Bay 100 area. That's not totally uncommon to see high alkaline soil. Since we don't have any limestone out here on the East Coast, Eastern Shore, that's usually not the issue. But in other parts of the United States, limestone can create high alkaline soils like that. So yeah, anyways, I know this is probably like maybe more information than you ever wanted, but I'm just showing you that this is what I look at when I do a site visit or I'm doing a consult for homeowners, is I'm looking at these different layers, and often I don't go much further than like 28 to 40 inches, because those soils we just don't reach for any reason that we're going to be using them for. So most plants are growing in these first couple of layers up to like 28, 36 inches. What it might say or might not say is where the water table is. On some of these soils that are adjacent to the water, it may say in this BC layer, very, very wet marine or tidal waters are present, things like that.
What are the yellow lines signifying?
That's signifying where these soil types are. So similar soil types are gonna be found throughout this area that have HFB, and that's that Hambrook series that we're looking at right now. But sassafras is almost as much, and it's probably a very similar series. A lot of these soils are very similar, they just, soil scientists are very particular, and they use different qualities to distinguish them.
I jumped to the one along the water,
Oh, okay.
just so we could see
Yeah,
the
let's,
difference.
so let's take a look. So this Hongo series, I've never heard that term before.
Here, let me go back so you can see the.
Yeah, okay, so looking at this, see how much, can
So I just wanted to show you the first one, so you can see that it's 80% Tonka.
Yes. Now look at, do you remember what the colors kind of looked like on the other soil horizon?
Oh, did I jump too fast?
Yep, I jumped too
They
fast. There
were
we go.
oranges, weren't they?
They were a little bit more orange and yellow. Now these, what this gray says to me is these are much more depleted soils, probably higher contents of clay, probably fewer nutrients available. And then this thick O layer, that O is for organic. So what it says to me is there's probably a thick peat layer or not decomposed plant material that's sitting thick on top. And there's probably a reason for that. It's probably because it's very tidal or it's very wet. And yeah, so if you get the loamy is just the texture. That's not a reference to the color necessarily. So don't get confused by that.
There's your beat.
Yep, submerged upland tidal marsh, that's exactly what it is. And that's why you have that thick organic layer because of the brackish water, it's not decomposing, it's just kind of sitting on top. It's definitely not good for building, probably not good for most gardens, but if you were gonna do like a shore planting or a shoreline planting, you could do shoreline plants in there knowing it's brackish, right? So, and there's just a lot of information to be had from this, but it's interesting if you're into soils because plants derive everything from the soils that they're planted in. So it doesn't hurt to take a look at it, even if you don't completely understand it. There's a lot of other information that you can. This pH, if you click on that box that says pH, it's on the left-hand side.
This one here?
No,
that
go a little bit higher. There you go.
Okay.
I don't know how accurate this is in terms of like if you took a soil test at home. I would recommend getting the soil test especially if you're going to garden. But you can take a look at this and it kind of shows you to what depth, what pH you're going to find in these different depths in this particular soil. And again, it's going to be different here than it is over here. So always get a soil test. But what it's telling me is that it's actually fairly neutral to slightly acidic, which is not unusual here.
So how is that updated?
So let's get rid of this.
Oh, it probably isn't updated very frequently because they would have to use like.
So this would be basic, what was here when you built it?
Right. This is a compilation of data from historic soil maps. So what they used to do, or what soil conservation districts used to use, is have these books for every county, and every county broken up by like different quadrants. So all this information you used to have to look up in a book only by going to the soil conservation office, which it's crazy to think nobody does that anymore. So the fact that they've achieved by putting all that information online like this, and I can just click it and look at it, is pretty amazing. So it's really great.
I wonder if they're doing, so there's ground penetrating radar that can detect
Right.
all of that. I wonder if they're looking to do
Probably.
some of that.
And I'm sure that's why it's taken so long.
Well, like the US Geological Survey for the federal government does that across the country for minerals, so.
And I know it's taken them a long time to get every state on the map. Like for a long time, the Midwest didn't have any of this information available. I think because they were just
That's what
working
I'm
on.
wondering if it's coming from some of that data.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, they're cross
It's all publicly
pollinating.
available.
So anyways, there's a lot of, it's really interesting to kind of look at. There's a lot of variability, even just in this little area town of Easton. I think this one up here, this FAC capital A, if you, click on that, let's see. Fallsington. I think one of these soils up here is actually a very sandy soil. So there's like pockets of little sand, but most of what all of our soils are, oh, that's not it. Maybe. Most of what all of our soils are alluvial deposits from being in the bay. It used to be, I think a glacier sat there, right? So everything that got drained out of that glacier, all of those alluvial deposits from rivers draining into the Chesapeake Bay, that's what our soils are now. So it's not any surprise if you see alluvial deposit on almost all of these soils. Yeah.
What kind of deposit?
Alluvial, that's just, it's a term for, they were transported by water. Mostly, I would think rivers, but, and I can't remember the difference between fluvial and alluvial, but both of them have to do with the movement
An
of water.
alluvial plain is like the mouth of a river,
Okay,
so
thank you.
it's where, there's a lot of silt and stuff like that.
And probably because the bay is like the mouth of,
Yeah, well, we were totally underwater thousands of years ago.
Bottom of the bay.
Fluvial is of or found in a river.
okay, so fluvial and then alluvial, it must be
I
like.
think it's like which way the water flows.
Right.
Like alluvial.
There's a lot of different
Yeah.
terms I'm not.
Alluvial is out and.
I'm not, and to be fair, I'm not a soil scientist, okay? I'm a plant person, but I just wanted to show you guys so that you have this resource at your fingertips. So what we'll do,
So yeah, I'm sorry, I went on there, I'm on there right now, and I can't figure out, I'm on the UC Davis California Soil
Okay,
Resource Site.
it might be different on a mobile device. I can't promise it's gonna behave the same as it does up here. It's the mobile or, versus
How did you get to your location?
menu in the top left.
Menu.
Drop down, zoom to location.
So if I start now, really.
And you can use your current, like if you're on your phone, maybe that's even better, is you can use your current, but I just put in an address to wherever it is I'm looking at. Yeah, and that's how I got there. And then it drops you, you know, right there. And, but you use your finger, I guess, if you're using a tablet or a phone, or your cursor to just click on these different ones to bring up the soil on the left, the soil maps. Okay? All right. I hope I just didn't confuse you more, but I wanted to look it over. What we'll do is we'll switch gears to the other resource I mentioned. This is now taken over by the Alliance of the Chesapeake Bay, but it used to be called the Native Plant Center. I guess they still kind of kept the name. But this is a searchable database of a resource that we brought the first couple of days of classes. U.S. Fish and Wildlife put it out. It's the Native Plants for Conservation Landscaping. Am I saying the whole name? Sounds right. So it's basically that information, but now it's a searchable database online, which is really handy if you're looking for plants and you want to narrow it down to, okay, I need plants for shade and I need it for clay soils. You can actually, if you scroll down, you can actually select your region, which I would always say coastal plain for us. Yep, so you can select different qualities, and there are more filters that you can use, but these are good starters. So plant type, let's say you're looking for an herbaceous plant, or you're looking for ferns, you can kind of key them out, or you can look for them all. Sun exposure, soil type, soil moisture. Some of these you may not know, or it may not matter. So you can either leave them blank, or you can select them. What I will say is if you get too specific, nothing will come up. So just know, like, if nothing comes up, just where you need to back off of, where do you need to unselect, like where you're getting too specific. But there's a lot of different plants on this tool, which is really nice.
Question.
Yeah.
We,
So yeah.
we've got a backyard full of oak trees. Which are beautiful big old oak trees.
Right.
That fall over. Well, we just had some taken down, but, because they were dying. But nothing seems to want to grow under an oak tree, other than an azalea, and it might get really excited, you might get a rhododendron to be
Right.
interested.
Right.
Is there a source that says, okay, because I'm not gonna take down massive
Yeah,
oak
absolutely.
trees, they're beautiful. Is there a source that you have that would say, you could try this under an oak tree? Or, and the soil's one thing, but it's,
Right.
it's the rest
It's
of
the
the
roots.
stuff that's
Yeah.
there.
And there's just not a lot of soil availability under roots for that reason. Also, they're competing with nutrients. That's why grass is growing under trees too. Number one, there's no light, but there's not as many nutrients to be had. So what I do, and maybe I can send this to you, Jody, is I search for plants that can grow in shallow rooted systems or under trees. You can just say native plants for under shade trees. And usually it'll come up with things like Tiarella, foam flower is a good one. A lot of, the Pennsylvania sedges are good for shade. Even the wild ginger can handle.
I'm trying, the foam flowers, 2 out of 3 are alive, so I'm doing
Okay.
better.
My guess is with the acidity, that's also a challenge.
Yes.
And it may be that you just can't grow as much under there. Hold on, give me a second. Partridge berry would be a good one. That is a very, very low growing, evergreen. And it's like, basically kind of like a vine plant. But yeah, I would specifically look at those parameters. There's not, unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources out there about that very topic. And I also am interested in it, because I get that question.
I bet you do.
Yeah,
So,
so,
a lot of other trees that will do the same, have the same problem, like, a neighbor with a river birch that she can't grow anything under a hospice, or, oak trees.
Oak's what's killing me.
What?
Oak.
So,
Yeah,
and what we
trees don't
don't,
like that moisture underneath.
we normally don't recommend, putting too heavy a layer of mulch or compost on top of root systems, because that ends up smothering them and they don't get enough oxygen, it actually can harm the tree. But you can do like a 2-inch layer of compost when you're replanting, or if you're planting under there, and that does help get your plants at least in there. Yeah, get them started, and they may not need much more than that in the future, but that's what I would probably recommend.
So if I'm mulching too heavy.
Probably, a lot of people do.
Yeah, well, so rather than having just yard that's dust and moss, we've kind of carved out and said, fine, nothing's gonna grow, so we just put, areas of mulch, and that way, in theory, the tree is happy, we're happy, and the dust bowl is somewhat reduced.
And that's fine, you can use mulch too, and that's probably the other thing I would recommend.
Try some big containers, big containers.
For sculpture, for fencing. Yeah, it's a challenge, and that's what, sometimes that's what landscaping is, it's just figuring out what your challenges are and the problem solving, and so the Tiarella didn't work, I'd probably try something else then, like, no sense in keep throwing something at it that doesn't work. So, yeah, that's a good question though. So yes, anyways, Trina brought us to a nice list by selecting these different kind of
I was
parameters.
thinking about her wet area.
Oh, yeah. So moist or even wet, I would even select wet, and then you get kind of a wet, well, you can do both. And sometimes you'll see a lot of crossover between, it's not like plants are just one of these categories, sometimes they're all. And so you'll see, hopefully a wide variety. Yeah, so you've got some plants. Now, my one argument against this website is I don't think the pictures are very helpful or very, very good, high resolution. These are kind of like the original ones they used in the booklet that was printed a long time ago. So what I do sometimes is I'll just search the plant in Google to see better pictures of what's out there. But certainly helps you kind of narrow down what you might want to look at. I would argue
Here's
that.
the wild ginger.
I'm a little surprised butterfly weed did we select part sun or full sun?
Let's
See, it says right here part sun, okay, that's why it came up. I was gonna say in shade butterfly weed would not work. And I'm very surprised it's under moist or wet soils as well.
Me too, because it likes
Dry.
my very dry
Yeah,
water.
so there's variability. But it's not a perfected system.
However, it's growing really well in my wet swampy area.
What is?
Butterfly.
Oh, really?
I don't know,
right?
well,
You know what?
for me.
If it's happy there, don't.
I'm not
Get force in the mouth. Yeah, so and some of these things, you may be like, I've never heard of this thing before. And that's the other challenge is finding a nursery or a place that sources them. That being said, at least the Maryland Native Plant Center, or Native Plant Society, I think I told you, has a nice list of nurseries that supply or specialize in native plants and seeds. Yeah, anyways, just another tool at your disposal. And I think, unless we have any other questions about this, we'll move on to the actual talk I was going to do today. If you don't make it through, that's fine.
And just turn that off and back on, I could probably went to sleep,
Oh,
it took so long, but
That didn't take so long.
there we go.
All right, so I did bring you a couple of resources today, and we can include these in the folder as well. Both of these are from the Xerxes Society. I know I talked about them last week because they're very big on the conservation of insects. And so one is a nice little chart of native plants for the Mid-Atlantic. It has a nice category for bloom period, so it'll kind of give you an idea of when it blooms, which is what we're kind of focusing on today, is talking about seasons and planting for the right seasons, because especially for creatures, but for our interest as well, it doesn't do to have everything bloom in the spring and then, the rest of the year it looks kind of uninspiring. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of idea of how these plants fit into different categories of usefulness. And the other one I really liked, and I'm sorry, the print is very small on it, you might need a magnifying glass. The Xerxes Society recommended high-value plants for pollinators. So these are plants that have been identified as having high wildlife value for insects in particular, but they could have crossover for mammals as well. And just be sure that you're looking for the specific region. I think this box in the middle, you would look down in the bottom right, Southeast and Mid-Atlantic, and that's kind of a short list. And all of those, as I'm looking at them, yes, for here. Oh, except Gaillardia. Gaillardia is a little bit out of our region.
I thought that was interesting that they have that, because I've got that growing in the front of my yard and it does beautifully and really easy to grow.
Right.
Really easy.
And it's a good example of a plant that has high value. It's not necessarily native to this region, but if it performs well, there's no problem. Same thing with coneflowers. Coneflowers aren't technically native to the coastal plain of Maryland, but they're everywhere. They do fine. They do very well, and they're high wildlife value. So just because it's not native doesn't mean it would work or doesn't fit here. And then at the bottom, this is a nice table. These are not necessarily native plants. In fact, most of them aren't. It's edible landscaping value plants with high value to wildlife, which I found really interesting because that's a good cross roads between human consumption and insect consumption. Where can we combine the two? All right. So like I said, we're going to focus, we're at the end here, planting for seasons. And I'm going to talk about seasonality, and you'll notice a lot of crossover from my conversation last week, just because there is a lot of crossover between seasonality and the benefits to insects. So I apologize if there's any information that's repetitive. All right, so here are kind of representations of things in different seasons, right? We've got our trilliums or spring ephemerals in the spring. We've got a lot of our aster kind of flowers starting to come out in the summer. Then we're looking at goldenrods and fall blooming asters in the fall. And then what we usually see in the winter is a lot of berry-like plants because there's not a lot of things that are blooming in the winter, right? This, I think I brought last week as well, but this is available online. They don't have them in print right now. I keep hoping that they're going to come out with a new printing this year. But this is a really useful tool for us, or a useful publication for us. And my favorite part of it is in the center fold of this booklet are these different flowering periods of the plants that are in the booklet itself. And for me, because I'm a visual person, I need to look at what's blooming when. And the green just means it's a tree or a shrub, so it's a woody plant, versus the yellow, which is a wildflower. And so this is a nice way to take a look at where you might have gaps in your seasonal plantings. Let's say you don't have a lot of things that are blooming, what did we say in June? You didn't see a lot of things last Friday in bloom. Well, silky dogwoods, common milkweed is just starting to bloom now. Yellow indigo, which I feel like it's a little late for that. And then black-eyed Susans are starting to bloom as well. So like, if you're looking at where gaps are and things that are not blooming in your garden, or what time things are not blooming, you could take a look at this and just extrapolate some ideas, because you also know these are all have been listed as beneficial for native bees.
And the seasonality can be adjusted based on a real wet spring or a dry spring.
Right. There's a lot of variability, you're right.
We just keep feeling like things are happening a lot faster.
They are.
Which is probably part of why we're in zone 8A now instead of 7B.
I mean, I see it in the buttonbush that was at Sue's yard. So buttonbush is normally, doesn't start blooming until July. Well, it's early June and it's the one outside our office, at least, is almost already done blooming. It's crazy early. So things are a little bit earlier than they used to be. And there's a lot of variability in seasons depending on the temperature and time and where we are. And it's not just about flowers, even though we examine flowers as their benefits for providing for pollinators. What we can also look at are those other features and characteristics we don't think about is bark, fruits, or fall color, things that have an impact at other times of the year when they're not in bloom. Even the foliage and texture, birds, or structure, which would be, it provides habitat for nesting birds and things like that, which is mostly also what I'm going to be covering today. All right, so as we're looking, what is like the earliest thing that's going to be in bloom in the year is red maple and black willows. And those are actually, if we go back, they're the first two things, and they can bloom, actually, I would say February for red maples. Red maples bloom as early as February, and then black willows, which are great for wet areas. They'll soak up a lot of water. They will be blooming in March, so those are super early spring things. And why are those so important? Because when you have those random warm days, especially in like March where things are starting to warm up, bees and things are emerging, and if there's nothing for them to forage, they expend energy they don't have, right? So it comes at a great cost to them if they start foraging and there's nothing there. So there's a lot of value in these two plants, just in the fact that they are the very first things that provide for bees and insects. And I would argue dandelions are somewhat similar to that because they do provide some early season pollen when there isn't much going on. But I know that's a different argument. We won't go down that road. But then there's, did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw your hand raised. All right, so we have those black willows and maples starting, and then kind of behind them, and I would say in March they'll start to bloom, is the service berries. Another name for that is shadbush. Does anybody know the reason behind that? Because it used to be that the blooming of shadbush was at the same time as shad, the actual fish, were running up the rivers. Now I don't know if that's the case anymore, but you will occasionally hear it called shadbush for that reason. So it's a very early spring plant. And serviceberry is one of those shrubs that has been multi-seasonal benefits, and we'll talk about that because those are the kind of plants you want in your landscape where you're getting the most bang for your buck. And red buds and blueberries, which we saw Sue and Lynn's red buds at their house. They were way past bloom, but that's what they look like when they are in bloom, is this picture on the bottom left. They have these really small, and they're legumes, so they have kind of a pea-like flower, and they're a very bright pink. It's very festive, especially early in the season. And because it's a smaller stature tree, it looks really nice in the landscape because it provides color very early in the season when there isn't much else going on. Like things haven't popped out of the ground yet, unless you have a lot of sperm ephemerals. This is where your color is going to be seen, isn't a lot of the shrubs and trees. Flowering dogwoods, which are probably now past as well. Here's the shadbush in the upper right. Service berries, I'm going to name for it, right? And then I included this. This is a type of blueberry. It's actually called deerberry. So it's not an edible fruit for us. They're very astringent. They're not tasty. But their flowers are super high value, especially for bees. There's a lot of specialist bees that go for blueberry species. And so having a lot of those blueberries in the landscape is very beneficial for them. And then we're coming about to this time of year where we're, late spring, approaching early summer. A lot of our black cherries have probably come and gone. Even a lot of the dogwoods have probably come and gone. But this plant in the bottom, in the middle, this elderberry, is in full bloom right now. And it's a great plant for wetland areas in shade and sun. Very good at being in wet areas, and the fruit is edible to us, which is nice, but it also provides for about 48 species of birds. So if you can beat the birds to it, that's great, but if you don't, that's fine because it's very good for them.
When you say good in what areas, you mean also brackish or?
Thank you for clarifying. Tends to be freshwater, but like the buttonbush I mentioned earlier, buttonbush can handle some brackish water. It might do well on your shoreline, actually. But, you know, be careful, especially with these kinds of plants that I mentioned can be edible for us. They can be easily confused for plants that are not edible for us, like poison hemlock. So, because they look somewhat similar, but keep in mind, elderberry is an actual shrub, a woody plant, and poison hemlock is not, or water hemlock.
It was a good example of that a couple doors down from our house. If we were in the meadow looking out north, there was blooming and
Of which one?
of the elderberry.
Oh,
It's really pretty right now.
What's the elderflower liqueur? Help me out. That's made out of
Oh,
the
yeah.
flowers of this.
I don't know the liqueur, but I know that it's an elderflower tonic you can get.
Yes.
Which is particularly good with vodka or gin.
The flowers. I think sea germain.
That's
That's
the
sea germain. Okay, that's derived from the flower of elderberries. So, you know, interesting plant. Multi-faceted kind of plant. And this one I really like too. This is the red twig dogwood, which right now my branches aren't quite that red. They kind of revert back to green in the summer when they're growing, but in the winter they'll go back to being bright red like that. But again, another plant that has high wildlife value. It blooms in the spring, which is nice. The berries are eaten by birds very quickly. And then in the winter, I have something interesting to look at. I have those red twigs, and I cut them, I use them in things.
Did you say that was black cherry?
This one's black cherry. This is red twig dogwood. I think Hornus alba is the name now. They changed it. I don't like it when they change plant names. It means I have to memorize things over again.
Well, they should refer to by Latin name, we should just use Latin names.
Well, no, they changed the Latin name. So every once in a while, plant scientists get a hair up their butt and they decide like, oh, that's not classified in the right group anymore, and they'll change it. That's just, it really is insane.
Ornithologists do that too.
Yeah, oh, they do? Oh, that makes me feel better, I guess. Scientists, you know, we're always looking at the new data and new information, so it's good, it's good. So this is a chart I actually made. It's longer than this, because there's more bees than this, but this is the beginning of it. So this is information I extrapolated from a couple of different resources to demonstrate when bees are the most active. And now blue indicates they're active, but it's less activity or not as important activity. The yellow is when they need provisions the most. This is when they need their foraging. This is when they need pollen, things like that. And you'll notice some bees are very resilient, like the carpenter bee, probably because it's a bigger bee. It doesn't spend as much energy, but you know it's active for a much longer season than some of these others, which is why it's so critical. We talk about providing for early season bees because this is when they're active and that's when the least amount of food is to be had. Yeah, question.
What does the mining bee do between June and August? It appears it's very active and then it goes dormant. Does it just?
Well, it doesn't go, it's not like it dies or goes dormant, but they aren't foraging as much, or maybe they have finished laying their eggs and mating and things like that. So yeah, there's kind of like a rush and then there's a down period. I actually don't know why there is that gap, and I don't know if September and October is just like a last ditch minute effort to.
Well, last build up for the winter.
Right, for winter, right, that's what I think it is. But you'll notice a lot of bees, they won't have as much activity in the summer months, and I don't know if it's just because of the heat or, you know, their seasonality is just in the spring. It's just when we see all their activity. They're only mating and eating and breeding at that point in time, and then they go dormant or hibernate. What's it called? It's not hibernation. Diapause. That's when insects kind of go into hibernation.
Oh, I want
Yeah.
Can we start now?
And actually, bumblebees are another one, a very resilient group of native bees, because they're able to be active at so much time of the year. You know, there's more resources available to them because they live a little bit longer, maybe, or they're more active. Again, this is a Xerces Society chart, but when I went to go look it up this morning, I could not find it. So I don't know if they've pulled this information now or this is an old publication. But same thing, this information is listed based on when things are in bloom. So it gives you kind of a progression of when things are gonna be in bloom. And this is specifically for the Mid-Atlantic. Now the trees and shrubs is very short, I don't know why, but maybe this is just supposed to be like a snapshot of things at a glance. So again, using a variety of plants, so not only are you improving biodiversity, but you're providing lots of different plant types and colors and heights. So if you take away anything from this class, it's just having that biodiversity, having the different kinds of plants and building in those different layers, that's very beneficial for the environment. And blooming over the seasons is always helpful for us as well as for insects. So again, this is just a kind of a short summation of things that bloom at different times of the year. Golden Alexanders are a great one that bloom in the spring. Beard tongues, lyre leaf sage, those are things that are just beginning to be finished now. Now we're kind of moving into summer. Milkweeds are, common milkweeds in full bloom. I saw it out at Pickering Creek this morning. And rudbeckias, so those are the black-eyed Susans. Sunflowers will be in bloom all summer. And then the bee bulbs are just starting to get going as well. And as we move into fall, we're going to be looking at a lot more goldenrods, and there's 27 different species of goldenrod in Maryland. So they bloom from a very wide variety of seasons, include a couple of different species, because they really are great plants to have. Blazing star, liatris, you mentioned you just planted
Mine
some.
again, the blooms are starting to come up.
They may be, I feel like liatris could be bumped into spring, but yeah, anyways, it's all dependent on the weather. And then ironweeds or vernonia, which is another really great one. And I would say late fall. I wouldn't classify these as winter, okay? But a lot of late fall asters, bone sets, we talked about, eupatorium, and swamp sunflower, which might be the latest blooming native perennial in this area. I see it bloom into November. So again, that's just a really nice
Well,
plant.
having those
Really
late fall, winter
Yeah.
might be because they have such interesting winter characteristics for the landscape.
That's true as well. Yeah, and again, late fall and winter is a critical time because insects do a mad grab right before, especially native bees, right before winter. Yeah, and then seeds for birds. Yeah, so there's a lot of reason why we have plants blooming all season long. And just think of it in terms like if you had to forage these items for yourself all year long, you'd want a variety of things to choose from, right? A buffet, if you will, across the seasons. But there's a lot of other seasonal attributes that are really helpful for us. One thing I like to say is the bark of the river birch, very hard to beat, very sculptural in winter. It's a very attractive tree, and if you remember, you probably don't, but I'll tell you. Last week, birches were one of our top 5 plants for caterpillars, meaning that they support a lot of different bird species in turn. And then this is our native persimmon. It's just a gorgeous plant. The tree is actually not that gorgeous, but the fruits are very gorgeous. And this is a plant that has male and female plants. So in order to get the fruits, you need a male and a female. And they're edible to us. They're also called sugar plums, which I didn't know that. I think maybe it's a southern thing. But you have to wait until the fruits are just about ready to drop on the ground, or they've just dropped on the ground. Because if you pick them too early, they're astringent, so that they're very tart. But once we've had a frost, or that they're just starting to ripen, man, they get nice and sweet. They're so good. I do like it's a persimmon bread pudding recipe. It's so good. It's kind of like a banana, like substitutes a banana for it.
Wait. So how, I have a person, and I don't know, and I got it from Evans. And I'm wondering if it's a male or female. How do I find out?
Look at the flower. Is it still flowering? Does it have any flower?
No.
Hard to tell. It should have been labeled. I mean, they're usually labeled.
How can you tell from the flowers with both of them?
You have to, I don't know if you have to put it under a microscope, but you need a hand lens and you examine whether it has anthers or if it has a stigma, which would be the female flower part. Female flower part versus male flower. I know. It is very hard. I do the same thing with spice bush, and I still can't tell them apart. But you'd have to look at the flower. I mean, when in doubt, plant one of each. even if you don't know what the third one is.
Would the female flower also have the little fruit at the base of the flower, just like, other?
Well, if you don't have a male within a certain area, it won't develop.
No, I know, but that would be a way to tell.
Like the ovary, yeah, it might be there. It's been a while since I've looked at the actual flower itself, but yeah, that might be there too.
Like when you get a zucchini flowers
Right,
or a pickle flower, but on a cucumber,
right,
cucumber flowers.
right.
The female flowers
There's like
will
a
have
bump
a
underneath.
tiny little, piece of the fruit that eventually grows. If it doesn't get
Yeah,
pollinated,
like
it
where the
dies.
seed develops.
Right.
It's called the ovary, but yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same thing. Yeah, but there's so much variability in nature. I'm not sure that you
trees do the same thing, yeah.
So persimmon's not like holly, because holly, the males are the ones that don't flower.
Well, there's so
The
many
females
hollies,
have-
right? There's so many hollies that I think it's easier to tell because the fruit sets, the pollination happens really quickly, so you can tell which is which. But persimmon, if there's not another persimmon nearby that's of the opposite gender, you probably won't be able to see the fruits. And trees might not develop their flowers or their fruits for many, many years. So it could just be it hasn't flowered yet. Anything, it doesn't.
I guess my question is,
Yeah.
if it doesn't get flowers, doesn't that mean it's male? Because a
No,
holly tree,
male flowers exist.
but, okay, so, because I
Yeah,
know
the
a
male
holly.
flowers are different, but
Yeah.
they do flower.
Okay.
But what happens is, okay, we'll go down a botany road.
You don't get the fruit.
Yeah,
Males
no,
don't get
so
the fruit.
like I said, when you have a flower that has both the male and the female parts, we call it a complete flower. It's self-pollinate.
Right.
So it doesn't need another specimen. You can do it. Tomatoes are a great example of that. Male and female flowers, they separate out those male parts and female parts. So plants that have just the female flowers will have what's called a stigma in the ovary, which is where the fruit develops. And then on the male flowers, there's the anthers in the stamens. So they have all of the male pollen that needs to get to the female. And then once those flowers are done blooming, they just drop off. You just don't see them anymore. So once they've bloomed, the male flowers, they're gone, they're done.
But on the females,
And
you'll
you
see
hope.
a berry.
You hope during that time there is crossover, which is why insects are really important, right? Because they usually carry that pollen to the
I
females.
used to do
No,
plant dissection.
example.
Oh, of course, yeah. So there you go, yeah, so
But I was just wondering if it was.
it is very confusing.
Holly's really easy to tell, and I was thinking
Yeah.
persimmon might be somewhere. but-
If you have the flowers, yes, you can usually tell them apart. And maybe I can send you pictures.
So the idea is that the hollies are a good example because you can buy a shrub that they know that variety is male and another variety is female.
Specimen.
That's what you're
Not
saying.
right, specimen is.
Yeah, right. So yeah, that's what I had in my yard with a couple of different hollies, is I specifically bought a male and they said in Atkins, that you need one of these varieties to go with it.
Right.
I guess they don't do that with trees.
Good nurseries will tell you that up front. Or, like, it may be that they missed it. Maybe they didn't tell you, hey, do you know that if you want the fruits, you need blah, blah, blah. But like, if you go to a big box store, you go purchasing things, you probably won't know.
And they might not even.
And they might not say, they won't
They
say.
might be incorrect too. The Atkins, when they have their sale, I spend a lot of time reading up on the different things and then Googling them. It's a great, it's a great way of learning.
But their specimens are very small, and I've had a
Right.
high failure rate on a few things. Now, maybe it's where I'm planting them, but for example, foam flowers.
Yeah.
3 of them did great. One of them that's 12 inches measured away died. So I'm struggling.
There are pro and con to that because yes, they're really small and honestly, I spent $1,500 one time. I thought I needed a truck and it's just in the back of my little SUV. But those, once you'll get them into the second, if you can get them into the second season, they will adapt to your soil much better than those pretty big ones that you buy at nurseries. And they do really, really well in the long run. It's just sometimes you have to,
It only takes a while to get there.
yeah.
Yes.
It takes a lot of plants, like 3 years before it's grown.
And that's where using seeds is sometimes more economic.
Yeah, that's possible.
You could try throwing some seed down and see what comes up.
It does say that it's take 3 to 5 years to even have flowers, and that the male flowers will appear in clusters, and the female flower is a single flower.
And, but you have to, I hope, is that for the native persimmon? Okay,
Yes,
I was gonna say, cause there are Asian persimmons.
is the
And I just-
Diospyros one the?
Yeah, Diospyros, good. Because the Asian persimmons, I think, are a little bit different, and maybe they don't need the male and the female. I'd have to look that up.
There was another one that.
Yeah, yes, there are a few that, plants are confusing. Anyway. So just another example, a demonstration of how seed heads can be very sculptural, very interesting in the winter. I argue the winter is probably my favorite time to look at things, because you're noticing the things you don't see at the rest of the time of the year. You're distracted by the flashy flowers. You got to see the more subtle hints of things going on. So this is like woolgrass, which has a very orange, very interesting seed head, very interesting in winter. These I think are Rudbeckia maybe and Monarda seed heads. So again, I'm just using this as an argument for why you don't necessarily want to cut things down at the end of
It's a little
September.
different, black and white photography versus color photography.
Right. Yeah, I think it makes you really appreciate the subtle, more subtle attributes of native plants, instead of just focusing only on, okay, does it have a flower and what color is the flower? You know, there's a lot more benefits to be had. So these are kind of the plants I like to recommend for multi-seasonal interests and benefits. Again, so if you only have like a certain amount of space to work with, you want the most bang for your buck, these are plants I usually recommend, Virginia Sweetspire being one of them. And that's because it has an interesting shape, so the actual shape of it is very nice, kind of this leafing form. It blooms in the spring, and it has these nice white flowers that are also fragrant. And then in the fall, it has very interesting fall color. So it has kind of like a reddish fall color to it.
How big does the wax myrtle get?
Depends on the cultivar, but they can get pretty big. They can get up to 12 to 15 feet tall. And southern wax myrtle I like because it's evergreen all the time. There's a northern bayberry that is semi-deciduous, so it loses half of its leaves and it looks a little scraggly. So, for more evergreen focus, I like the southern wax myrtle. Viburnums are also at the top of my list. And again, you might recognize that from being one of the top plants for bird habitat and food, because it produces berries that are high in fats that those birds need in the winter. So not only do viburnums have flowers in the spring, which they're just about finished flowering, they develop the fruits that are kind of these dark blue-black berries. And then in the fall, they also have really beautiful fall colors. So a lot of viburnums will range from yellow to orange to red, very attractive. So that's why this is like my short list of plants that I really enjoy, or short list of shrubs. And you'll notice the inkberry, so one of those hollies is on this list as well. Again, if you want the dark blue berries, you're gonna need a male and a female.
Is there one evergreen viburnum that is native to this area?
No, I'm trying to think if there's even a semi-evergreen one. I don't think so. All the evergreen viburnums we see are ornamental.
Ornamental,
Okay. And there's no problem with having one of those either. Like the leather-leaf viburnum, they tend to do okay. They're kind of interesting because they keep their leaves all year round.
I think winters are the season most of
might.
the year.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think if not witherrod, Nudo, if they keep it in use. I don't think so. So here's our native beautyberry on the left. There's a Japanese beautyberry, and I would caution people to be very careful purchasing Calicarpa because the non-native one is very aggressive, and we do not want it to spread because it's just kind of a bully in the landscape. But the native beautyberry, I argue, is just as gorgeous. It actually has bigger fruits, and they're about the same color. They're these purple colors, but the fruits are held more closely to the branches as opposed to the Japanese one, which has them on little, like dangling away from the branches. They're on little peduncles, they're called. You want a good example. But yeah, gorgeous plant. Obviously, it's great for the berries, but it also has really beautiful yellow foliage in the fall. And chokeberries are another one of my top plants for landscapes, just because they have a variety of seasonal interests. They produce these berries that are actually edible for us, but very, 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 very tart. Like, because they actually have higher antioxidant content than both elderberry and blueberries, I believe. And because of that, when you bite into them, it's like, ooh, but you can make some really great syrups, or jellies and jams with these that are very high oxidant, and nothing will eat the fruits because of that astringent flavor. So they keep very well, but then the birds will come and eat them after a couple of frosts or in the winter because they've been frozen, and they get sweeter when they get frozen. So
And there's nothing else.
yeah, and there's nothing else. Yeah. They're desperate, is what I'm saying. I mean, if you have enough sugar, I'm telling you, these do taste good eventually. But you need a lot of sugar. You need to cook them down a lot. But there's a lot of good fall color in these as well, the leaves, I mean. There's dangleberry, which is a relative of blueberries, and that's about the color of blueberries that they get in the fall as well. Very gorgeous, really. And winterberries are another one I like to plug because, again, it's kind of a seasonal color, so it's Christmas time, it's winter, and it adds a little bit of interest to the landscape at a dank time of year. Also, I love to sell native grasses, because not literally sell, but like sell the concept of them, because I just adore native grasses. I think they're really underutilized in the landscape, and they add a lot of seasonal interest, but they're also great cover for birds and nesting creatures in the winter and in the fall. And I think they just, when they cut them back at the beginning of winter, it's doing such a disservice to the environment by not leaving them. And so there's a couple of different ones I really like. This one I think does really well as an ornamental grass, even though it is also native. It's called split-beard bluestem. Maybe hard to see in the screen, but it has a very reddish stem in the fall. And then it has these kind of bushy split white seed heads. Very gorgeous. Very,
How
very
tall does that get?
2 to 3 feet.
Okay, so it's a tall.
Yeah, not super tall. I mean, I guess I don't think of that as being super tall because there are some grasses that get like 6 to 8 feet. Here are two others that are really well suited for the landscape. Did you have pink muley grass?
Yeah, muley grass and native panicum.
Yep. So you probably didn't even notice this in Lynn's landscape because of course it's not in seed yet. It just looks like kind of a tuft of fine-leafed grass right now, but it will eventually get these clouds of pink seed heads. There's a white variety as well, but I love the pink one. You can't go wrong with the pink. And then little blue stem, which is also very orange-red in the fall, and it also has these kind of crescent, fluffy white seed heads on them that are really, really pretty. Really great for landscapes. I don't know why they don't use them more.
Any of them do well in shade?
This one kind of does. This is good for, actually this would be great for your property. The sea oats. Now they will spread, but if you're okay with that happening in an area where you want cover, they do great. And these will turn kind of a brown color, and when the wind blows, they kind of clap together. I think that's why they call them sea oats, because it kind of sounds like the ocean when they're blowing in the breeze. It's a really great cut flower as well. I'm sure you use it a lot.
How do they do under oak trees?
It's worth a try. I have some at home. Do you want to try some?
Yeah, it's not that.
They prefer wet areas, so I don't.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say if it's too dry, it will not. Will not comply.
Oh, what about the mulberries? Will that do in wet areas?
I think moderately well.
Yes,
Maybe not
super
wet.
It will, because I planted it at the
Yeah,
base
you
of the, there was some in the,
Yeah.
amongst some shrubs at the gate, and the bottom part of the yard,
Right.
having that in
Switchgrass is also good for wet areas, but it does need
sun.
some sun, yeah, at least part sun, if not more. So again, here is kind of my short list of native grasses for the landscape. Lynn, do you also have purple love grass?
Yes, I do.
I think
but
you
it's-
did.
But I'm noticing what Atkins had the same problem, that it goes over 2 years and then it kind of fades and dies off a little bit.
Well, and I noticed you have it at the base of your slope, it tends to like drier, I don't know if that's
And
influenced it.
that, it will get, if it's a big rain, you'll get moist there, but it's the driest part of that meadow,
Okay.
so.
And bottle brush grass is another good one for park sun or shade and wetter areas.
Really?
And that's the one. Oops. Did I break it?
Oh, sorry, I was looking up.
No, there we go. So this is the bottle brush grass, and this is a seed head just coming out. They get huge, and they do look like they're supposed to clean up.
Almost like a fountain grass.
Even bigger.
Oh.
I think it's really cool. I think it's very sculptural. But that will be done, that's like a cool season grass, so it's starting to bloom right now. And it'll be done by the heat of summer. But it keeps the seeds for a very long time, so that it's a very neat grass. Okay, came back to this, and we talked about some of the others. Here's some other, fall color to consider, things that you might not normally think of as.
The fothergilla.
Yeah.
That is the first shrub that blooms in my yard, and I love it.
Yeah, it's an early season bloom, and it's very alien looking, but I think a close second. It's very cool, and I think a close second is its fall color. It's really
Yeah, beautiful.
high quality color. And the other one that doesn't get talked about a lot is bald cypress. So this is a large tree for
I
bald
killed
cypress.
one of those.
You killed one of them. Now, if you have dry acidic ground, I don't think the bald cypress will like that.
Guaranteed, it does not.
It likes swampier, more organic soils. But this is a deciduous conifer, so it loses its leaves or its needles in the fall, and inevitably I get one call a year. Something's happening to my bald cypress, it's dying, it's lost all of its leaves, it's like, oh no, don't worry. I love those calls, because it's like, I can solve this problem, it'll come back next year. So those are really wonderful there's the dwarf fothergilla, flower, very popular with pollinators as well. Very cool, very alien looking. And then I have a list of trees for fall color, and I know you can look at this at your own leisure. But I talk about black gum, sassafras, which is maybe sassafras would work.
That might work.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is a really pretty tree, even when
it's so cool.
like right now, when some of the new leaves are coming out, they're kind of an orangish tinge to them.
Poplar trees, tulip poplars have great yellow color in the fall, and even hickory trees, which turn a brilliant kind of orange yellow colors. Those are really pretty. Again, very high wildlife value because it produces the nuts as well, which are enjoyed by many wildlife creatures. Yeah.
I almost consider tulip poplar to be invasive. Because it will,
Yeah.
I mean, I can go out in my yard now and see.
Right.
I
these
get a lot of them
10 to
too,
15
those, yeah. that I-
So, and I use those terms very carefully because invasive implies that it is also non-native, that it is.
Right.
Yeah, so I would call it aggressive. And yes, it might be aggressive, but tulip poplars are what we call early successional plants. So they're things that come in early, especially after, I know you did a tree cutting, was it last year? So they may come in early, especially if there's opportunity, because they're trying to compete with other plants. They grow quickly so that they can outshade other plants. But then, it's a challenge for you as the homeowner, but it doesn't mean they're a bad tree. It just means that you'll see
Yeah,
them.
but they're
A lot of
everywhere.
Yankee now.
Yeah.
I've got.
I get a lot of them as well. They're definitely in the woods in our neighborhood, but I get them a lot.
They even grow in our creek.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean,
I'm pretty
Sure,
sure
they could grow anywhere.
very opportunistic, yeah.
So can the black gum stand a little more moisture?
Yes, and in fact, it really likes it.
Really?
Yeah. That will handle the big
She's right, that one.
Yeah.
That's a big tree though.
And black gums,
It's very slow.
black gums are very slow growing. I almost call them a medium-sized tree because it's like, I'll never see its full height in my life.
True.
But black gum is great too, and they turn pretty much like at the earliest, so like at the beginning of the fall, or even August and September, that's when it starts to change color. So it's like the first tree that starts to change, and to me, that's like the signal of fall. I always like it. All right, and very briefly, I'm just gonna talk about some resources out there because, thank you, Michaela, you've given me all these native plant ideas. Now what do I do with them? Like how do you put them in the landscape? And what I will say is there's lots of resources out there with like design templates like this, which are available to kind of help you navigate what a native landscape would look like. And what's nice about these resources is they've been carefully thought of for not only the growing conditions, but to represent different times of the year, different blooms, and across different seasons. There are a ton of these templates, this one in particular, in this book, the Green Book for the Buffer. Now, I only have 3 with me, but it's available online. You can find all of these online very easily, and they give you different sizes, so they give you different square footage, and for someone, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your name right now. Trish, thank you. I know you're doing mitigation. They'll give you the number of credits that these kinds of plans will give you if you're doing mitigation, which is really nice, and that's kind of what this was meant to be. But it's just really, it gives you some good ideas. And especially if you're just looking to put in like a small cluster garden somewhere, really easy way to get some native plants into a formal plan like this. The other resource I like to talk about, and this is Howard County government that actually but it was a partnership with Master Gardeners. So I believe Master Gardeners helped develop these different templates. This is just an example of one. But it's from this website, and you can find all sorts of different templates that they have on that website. This one is a shade garden for pollinators, and shade is usually a big challenge for pollinators because they prefer the sun. But some really great ideas. It even gives you this plot that can be kind of manipulated, right? It doesn't have to be exactly this, but it gives you an idea of how many plants you might need, how you might arrange them according to their heights, just to give you some design ideas. So I really encourage you to look at these resources. They're very helpful, I think. In fact, I used one of them for part of my yard, and for the most part, things worked out really well.
Just to remember that if you're putting some trees in and you consider a sunny garden, they will eventually become shade gardens.
Right, yeah. And in this case, I think the biggest thing in this plan is a service berry, which, depending on the species, can get pretty tall, but they probably don't cast enough shade to really shade everything out. But since it's already in shade, it doesn't matter. Yeah, just some really good ideas that are out there. And again, that's the one we went over. This is the book that they've really adapted this from. So you can get your hands on a hard copy of this, which is hard to find because it's also not in print anymore.
There's a PDF
I got it from
version.
Atkins a couple of years ago.
Yeah, sometimes you can buy them, but honestly, the same information is in this database right here.
Oh, cool.
Trina, are you putting that in the resource section on the handout?
Her slideshow is in the
Can you just
resource.
go back again?
Oh, yeah.
Go back again.
Sorry, I know.
Yeah, you guys have all of the, her whole slideshow, I already put it in.
Where do I get, I missed the first class, so how do I get to that?
When I send the recording today, I'll send everything again.
Because it's a shared.
It's a link, it's a Google Drive folder that has
And
everything.
then all the video links will be on that too.
It's a
Yeah, well,
shared.
it's a PDF, so the
No,
links won't work,
no,
I'll
when
have
you-
to type them.
No, but when she sends the video out, the recording will have all 3 courses, the recordings and the handout link.
All right, are we good?
Yes.
And this is just the list of resources. Some of the ones I mentioned, some are new, like the Mount Cuba Center, which also has a lot of great resources on it.
They have great
Right.
research, books of different.
What I like about this one is you can look at the featured plants and get an idea of what would be blooming at this time, for different seasons, which helps me because, the charts that we see where it says, oh, it blooms anywhere from July to September, well, that doesn't always help me, but Mount Cuba is close enough to us where we can get a very good idea.
What about University of Illinois though, that's not very close to our
No.
area. Yeah, but it has a lot of good information.
Well, and I forget, Adkins Arboretum also has a What's in Bloom page. I can't remember where it's on.
They do. Pioneer resources.
And if you go out there and visit, they actually have laminated sheets that have the What's in Bloom on them, so you can kind of take them with you and go for a walk and match to what's blooming out
So
there.
this is Delaware, botanical garden,
I'm sorry.
is that right? The Delaware.
Oh, Delaware Botanic Gardens,
Yes, they do the same thing.
Right. And I'm sorry, I just realized,
Sorry.
the resource I had was from University of Illinois. I think it still had a lot of the same trees that grow in the eastern United
Yeah.
States, which is why I included it. But you're right, for plants, herbaceous stuff, probably not.
I'll copy that last
Oh,
page
okay.
and I'll add it to the resource sheet so you guys can just click on the link instead of typing those long.
Well, and we're about to ask questions, but real quickly, I just you might have already filled this out. You may have noticed it already. This is just evaluation for me for my own programs to demonstrate or to see if you guys have learned anything or if you feel more confident about using native plants in the landscape. You don't have to participate. You don't have to do this. But if you do, you don't need your name on it. You can just leave it on the table and I'll collect it afterwards. Sorry, that's me. Rude. There we go. So yes, any questions? I know we covered a lot in the last 3 weeks, and I don't expect you all to have this memorized, but hopefully this gives you some resources for where to get started, and where to find answers to think questions that you might have, but certainly at any point in time, you can reach out to me. Like I said, I'm a resource for homeowners in Maryland, so, feel free to email me with questions, or if you wanna check some information, like, hey, Michaela, I'm looking at this landscape plan, like, what do you think? Are these plants something you would put in here? I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.